To talk to us more about this, we are joined on the line by Dr. Frank Mattheis, a Senior Researcher at the United Nations University. Dr. Frank, good evening.
Very good evening to you.
Doctor, France has just seen a former president sent to prison, a rare moment in Western democracies. How significant is this ruling in terms of accountability and political culture in France?
Yes, indeed. It's a very rare moment to see a former head of government and head of state going behind bars. So it's certainly not something that happens often, neither in France or Western Europe, but globally speaking. So in this sense, it is important as a signal against impunity of political leaders, but also as a symbol to try to reinstate trust that citizens might have lost in the political leadership in their government. So in this sense, I would definitely say it's very significant to see this happening today in France, but also potentially in other countries.
And how independent is the French judiciary?
To a large extent, it has been under significant pressure. This has been a court case that has received a lot of media attention. The judges have been under tremendous stress, so they have received threats and to them personally. So there has been attempt to influence this case. But one could say that they've withheld that or tried to stand up against it, and there are, of course, some opinions that would say, well, there is some political motivation behind it. However, this is not properly proven or evidenced that the judges in this case would have a sort of a political agenda behind their verdict. It's been very well argued. They've demonstrated of which facts he has been accused of, which ones he has been called culprit, and in which ones not. So it's a very long verdict, and they've explained that just sending him into prison is precisely related not only to what has been done, but also he is supposed to be a public figure that the country looked up to and had trust in, and this warrants to have this type of verdict that includes a prison sentence.
The former president has vowed to say he'll challenge and continue to challenge his sentencing. Do you think he has a leg to stand on?
Well, it is, of course, in his right to appeal. I think it's going to be very difficult. He might get a lesser fine in terms of a reducement in the years he is supposed to serve in prison. So that's always possible, but it seems very unlikely that the judgment as such would be fundamentally changed. So there has been very strong evidence about him actively seeking for financial support from the Libyan government at the time. So it's going to be very difficult to get out of that. So while he will certainly proceed, so his sentence already has begun. Also, so he's spending the first night in prison tonight. So he still will appeal, but the sentence has already started at the same time.
How do you think this would position France in the international political system? As relevant as one country which has always suggested that it champions a global champion of democracy and justice?
Yes, on the one hand, you can say that the judiciary system is working. It's not the first high-profile politician that has been sentenced by the French judicial system. So we've had François Fillon before, the former prime minister who was a presidential candidate who was convicted for embezzlement, and Marine Le Pen, the opposition leader, who has been presidential candidate several times as well, has been recently convicted. So based on that, you could say there is a system that is very much vibrant and that is trying to keep political power in check. At the same time, you could say the fact that there is quite a number of cases, and now also hence to the fact that there's a problem in political power, in concentration of political power, and power abuse in France. Not necessarily in France alone, but it sheds the light on France particularly. So you could say it's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, yes, France can internationally stand as a good example or against impunity of political leaders, but at the same time, it also shows that corruption and political power have gone hand in hand, and that this means that there's something about the political system in France that needs to be reformed as well.
Dr. Mattheis, let's look at the broader terms. How important is it for democracies to demonstrate that no leader is above the law, even years after leaving office?
I think it is essential to showcase that there is no more favorable treatment to someone who has been in official positions, that has wielded significant power, personally speaking. It is an issue that we see globally with many former presidents, that there's some kind of one could call it a kind of a grandfather clause that if they have been in power, that afterwards they will be treated more favorably or more leniently, that no one is going to dig up too much beforehand. This is a problem. It is generally the convention that while political leaders are in power, they are granted immunity. So whether they're presidents, ministers, or MPs, that to a certain extent they are granted immunity, that there are higher thresholds for in order to impeach someone that is sitting in power. But that makes it all the more important that once they leave power, once the immunity that they have been granted through the office expires, that at that point they have to be taken accountable. And this partly can explain also why some of these things emerge a longer time period afterwards, so that it's more difficult in the moment itself while they're still in office. But this makes it more important to dig up. And yes, and trying to not showcase any favorable treatment. There is, of course, a tendency also in France now to still show some solidarity. So we've seen he was able to visit the current president Macron last Friday. The Ministry of Justice has said that the Minister of Justice will visit Sarkozy while he's in prison. So there is still a sentiment among the political elite in France that to pay respects in certain way to a former president, but especially the judiciary needs to be independent of that, and I think in that sense it is a very good signal, also globally speaking.
While we're still talking about the global precedents, does Sarkozy's case strengthen the global precedents for holding leaders accountable, or do you think it might discourage political elites from relinquishing power peacefully in the near future?
That's a good question. What will be ultimately the effect? I think there are different signals that this case sends out. There's first a signal against foreign involvement, foreign financing of elections, because that was at the heart of this case, that there had been meddling with campaign financing from the outside, so sending a signal that that those politicians that will accept illegally money from the outside in order to gain power, that this is under scrutiny, and this is that is still happening today from interferences from different countries. But there is indeed also the signal of showing that impunity is not granted. This is the case for penal issues, as has been the case here. But one could argue also more broadly for crimes against humanity, so for presidents that have against which there's a warrant from the International Criminal Court, for instance. So whether it's a Israeli president and others, that the judiciary sends a signal more broadly that it might be very difficult to persecute someone during office, but that afterwards efforts will be made in order to hold politicians that are being persecuted for wrongdoing during the time in their office, will still be persecuted afterwards. So I think in this sense it is a strong signal, but as you hint at, it can have this unintended consequence of pushing leaders to try to cling onto power even longer, because they might fear that afterwards they will lose the immunity that is accorded to them for their office. So this is indeed a possibility, so that it makes the stakes higher of that losing power is not only losing power, but it's also losing legal protection. So indeed it could have this backfiring effect that it creates an additional motivation for leaders to not wanting to leave office and staying on for second, thirds, etc. mandates.
Dr. Mattheis, thank you for your time this evening.